There is a Hebrew phrase woven into many last days prophecies in the Bible. And when you understand what it truly means, not just the English translation, but the original Hebrew, there will be a turning point on your entire perspective on the end times. It is not because the Bible itself has changed, but because you're finally seeing what it was saying all along. The phrase is Acharit HaYamim, and it doesn't mean what many prophecy teachers say it does. Here's what it really means and why it changes everything. Beloved, open your Bible to 2 Timothy 3:1. I know most of us have read it dozens of times. It says, "But know this, in the last days, perilous times will come." When we read this, our minds immediately go to tribulation, chaos, the end of the world, and a future season of catastrophe that we are either heading toward or already entering. When you read Hebrews 1:2, you find the same idea expressed again. In these last days, he has spoken to us by his Son. Hold on, the writer of Hebrews uses the same phrase, last days, but applies it to something that had already happened 2,000 years ago, the coming of Jesus Christ. Then in Acts 2:17, Peter stands up on the day of Pentecost and quotes the words of prophet Joel in the Old Testament, which says, "In the last days, God says, I will pour out my Spirit on all flesh." Peter makes it clear that they are in that moment prophesied by Joel. So what does that mean? Are the last days a future catastrophe? Or did they already begin at Pentecost? Or even earlier at the coming of Christ? The English translation doesn't fully resolve that tension, but the Hebrew does. Every time your English Bible says last days or latter days in the Old Testament, it is translating two Hebrew words, Acharit HaYamim. And this is where the shock comes in. The word Acharit does not simply mean last as in final, as in the very end, as in after everything else is over. In Hebrew, Acharit carries the meaning of the latter end, the place something is heading toward, the outcome, the destination, the result of a trajectory already in motion. HaYamim simply means the days. So together, Acharit HaYamim is not describing a sudden ending. It is describing the direction all of history is heading toward. This phrase appears all through the Hebrew scriptures. In Genesis 49:1, Jacob gathers his 12 sons and says, "Come together so I can tell you what will happen to you in the Acharit HaYamim." He is not describing a distant apocalypse. He is describing the trajectory of each tribe, where they are headed, what their future holds, and what the end of their story looks like. In Numbers 24:14, Balaam tells Balak, "Come, I will show you what these people will do to your people in the Acharit HaYamim." This isn't describing sudden destruction. It's pointing to a direction, a future shaped by purpose and outcome. Then in Daniel 10:14, the angel says to Daniel, "I have come to help you understand what will happen to your people in the Acharit HaYamim." What follows isn't random chaos. It's a clear unfolding of a map, a destination, and history moving toward a set point. Friends, here is the turning point. In English, last days often sounds like a countdown, time running out, everything heading toward collapse. But in Hebrew, Acharit HaYamim carries a different weight. It's not a ticking clock, it's a compass, pointing toward a future God has already determined. So history, in the Hebrew understanding, isn't falling apart. It's moving intentionally and steadily toward a defined end. Now go back to the New Testament and read it with this understanding. When Peter stands on the day of Pentecost and quotes Joel, which says, "In the last days I will pour out my Spirit," he isn't mistaken. He isn't speaking too soon. He is clearly declaring that Acharit HaYamim, history moving toward God's intended purpose, has entered a new stage. The Spirit has been poured out. The season of fulfillment has begun. The direction is set, and history is moving forward. When the writer of Hebrews says, In these last days, he has spoken to us by his Son. He is saying the same thing. The coming of Jesus Christ is not just another event in history. It is the moment everything became clear. The Acharit HaYamim, the latter days, began with his coming and will reach completion at his return. So this means something important. We are not waiting for the last days to begin. We are not standing on the edge of them. We have already been living in the Acharit HaYamim for 2,000 years. And that truth is not meant to bring fear. It brings clarity. Because if the last days began with Christ in Pentecost, then the chaos, the lawlessness, and the signs described in 2 Timothy 3 do not mean God has lost control. They are signs along the way, markers on a path God has already set. The direction has always been clear. We are simply further along the journey. This is where understanding Acharit HaYamim changes how you see the signs of the times. In 2 Timothy 3, Paul lists what the last days will look like. People loving themselves and money, being proud, abusive, ungrateful, without love or self-control. Many Christians read this and feel fear. But notice how Paul begins in verse 1. Know this and not be afraid. He is saying understand it, recognize it for what it is. The Greek word Paul uses for perilous, shalepos, describes something that grows more intense over time. It's not a sudden event. It's a rising pressure, building steadily. Jesus uses a similar picture in Matthew 24 when he talks about birth pains. Contractions don't happen once and stop. They increase in frequency and intensity. They are uncomfortable and unavoidable, but they are not signs that something is wrong. They are signs that something is about to happen. So the signs we see today, the moral decline, false teachers, division among nations, global instability, are not proof that God has lost control. Within the framework of Acharit HaYamim, they are like contractions. They are signals that history is moving toward its appointed outcome. The destination is drawing closer. That's what the signs are showing us. Here is the part that the fear-based end times industry rarely tells you. When the Hebrew prophets wrote about the Acharit HaYamim, they were not writing horror, they were writing hope. Isaiah 2:2 says, "In the last days the mountain of the Lord's house shall be established as the highest of the mountains, and shall be lifted up above the hills, and all the nations shall flow to it." That is restoration. That is glory. That is nations streaming toward God, not fleeing from Him. Micah 4:1 speaks with the same language in the same vision. A future where nations come together, peace is established, and God's reign covers the earth. It points to a clear destination. Then in Daniel 12:13, after all the visions and turmoil, the angel leaves Daniel with this: "But go your way until the end. You will rest, and then you will stand in your allotted place at the end of the days." For Daniel, the end of the Acharit HaYamim is not destruction. It is rest, inheritance, and resurrection. It is standing in the place God has prepared. This is the destination: the full establishment of God's reign, the resurrection of the dead, the restoration of all things, and the fulfillment of every promise God has made. Acharit HaYamim is not a countdown to destruction. It is a road leading home. So what does this mean for you, right now in a world that feels unstable? It means you are not here by accident. You were placed in this moment on purpose. Esther 4:14 carries that idea. For such a time as this. God doesn't place people randomly in history. He positions them. You are living in this season because it was determined that you would be here and that your life would matter within it. This understanding calls for a response, not panic and not passivity, but steady, faithful living. Stay spiritually alert. As Jesus said in Matthew 24:42, keep watch. This isn't about fear or constant anxiety. It's about awareness, clarity, and staying grounded in what truly matters. Be faithful with what you've been given. In Luke 19:13, the instruction is to Occupy until he comes. This is not a time to withdraw, but to live purposefully and bear fruit with your life. Hold on to what is ahead. Titus 2:13 calls it the blessed hope, the appearing of Christ. The destination is certain. Don't fix your eyes on the chaos around you, but on where everything is leading. The latter days are not the end of your story, they are the final stretch toward its fulfillment. Acharit HaYamim is the destination of every moment, empire, and generation. You are not living in a world that is falling apart. You are living in a world being brought to its conclusion by a God who declared the end from the beginning, who holds every nation in his hands, and who has never been caught off guard by anything happening around you. If this helped you see the word in a new way, share it with someone who needs it, and type in the comment, "The King is coming." When did you realize we've already been living in the last days for 2,000 years? Let me read your answer in the comment. Stay grounded in the word. The destination is sure. The King is coming. Shalom.